Welcome to our webinar, Reality Check, What to Expect from Automated Conversions to eBook. On behalf of Data Conversion Laboratory and Information Today, we are happy that you're able to join us. We realize your time is very important, and we think we have a presentation that will be well worth the investment of the next hour. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. Today's webinar is being recorded, and along with the questions and answers that you ask at the end of the presentation, those will be posted and made available to you. And ladies and gentlemen, I am going to have to hold on for a second. I'm getting a pop-up note that says the connection to the webinar server has been lost. Please check your network connection. Oh, bother. Our speakers will be taking your questions at the end of the presentation. If you have a question, please enter it in the question box on your webinar control panel. You'll see it down at the very bottom. And finally, during the presentation, you will have the opportunity to respond to some poll questions. So your participation will help the speaker tailor the presentation to your needs. Now, if you recall, we asked a couple of questions during the registration process. The first was, how many ebooks do you foresee doing in the next 24 months? And most of you said less than 10. And then it was a fairly even distribution between none, more than 25, or 10 to 25. The other question we asked was, what has been your experience with ebooks? And the great majority of you said none, just investigating. But there was also a good smattering of occasional, well, you've tried it but haven't had much success. You publish ebooks on a regular basis, and it took some tweaking of your materials, but you finally got it to work. So without any further ado, I would like to bring on Mark Gross of Data Conversion Laboratory to tell us a little bit about what they have to offer, and then we're going to get into Ms. Bloom's presentation. And if I can unmute Mark. Mark, you should be on.
Okay, thank you, Don, and thank you everybody for joining us today. Just as a quick summary of the agenda that we're going to be going through over here. I'm going to do a very quick introduction to ebooks, just to bring everybody up to the same page, so that we're on common ground. A short discussion on the difference between EPUB and MOBI and some other formats that might be there, and then we talk about conversions from HTML and PDF. I guess an important part of this webinar is talking about the limitations of automated conversions, and what things can be done automatically, what things you need to be watching out for, and a suggested approach, some ideas that we have about how conversions should be done, and finally a discussion of the things to keep in mind with special content. It's one thing to be bringing across text. It's another thing to be bring over math and tables and graphics and things like that. So, the last part of this webinar is going to go through some specific examples, which hopefully will help you come up with the things that you need to keep in mind. Quickly about DCL. I'm not going to read everything off over here. You can see it. We've been around for a while, well before ebooks, although there were things called ebooks back in 1981 also. They look a little different and a little clunkier, but we've been in this business for 30 years. We've been involved in some of the early technology as well as the latest technologies that we're working on now. And there was expertise in ebooks, tech docs, and all kinds of other things. We have a lot of, and you can see we've been involved in a lot of different industries, all the industries where information needs to be delivered. That's the thing. That's the place we've been involved in. Today, ebooks really crosses across many lines. It's not just the books that you buy that you download and buy, but just about every industry is turning towards using ebooks. So I think it's of importance to just about everybody right now. And we have a poll question, so I'm going to turn that over to Don.
All right. Thank you, Mark. The first question is, how important are ebooks to your organization and your customers? So if you could please select one. We've given you 4 options. Not a big deal yet. It's starting to come up in conversations. It's important, and we're working on an ebook process. We have a process to create ebooks that works. And roughly 2/3 of you have voted. So we'll keep this open for another, maybe let's say, 10 or 15 seconds. If you haven't voted, give it a little thought. So I'm going to try and close this poll since we're coming up on a minute. And wow. Mark, I can read the answers to you.
Yeah, please do.
43% says it's important and we're working on it. 38% says it is starting to come up in conversations. 11% say it's not a big deal yet. And 8% say we have a process to create ebooks that works. Any thoughts on that?
Okay, well, I think that shows you where things are going. Almost 90% have either are working with it, have things going on, or know that it's going to be coming up very soon. I think that's a pretty important, that tells you a lot about what's going on in the industry, where I think, you know, if you looked at this poll 2 years ago, it would be well less than half of people who had those kind of numbers. So it definitely is important. And this certainly important to our audience out there.
Right.
Is another poll question also, Don?
Yes, sir. We have a second poll question, and that is, what format is most of your content in? Because I suspect that during the presentation we'll get into it, but the format that you're coming from is very has a profound impact on how easy, how hard it is to go create ebooks. But what format is your content in? The choices are InDesign, markup languages being HTML or XHTML, XML, PDF, or something else. And we will keep this open for another 15 seconds or so. And thank you if you voted. We're up to 75, 80% of you have voted. And I am going to close the poll. And Mark, the answers were half of our audience are saying PDF, and then XML is roughly 16%, InDesign roughly 16%, HTML or XHTML 8%, and something else is 11%. So roughly half of the folks are saying PDF, and and another 25% are saying HTML or XML.
Right. Okay. That's also interesting. That roughly correlates with what we actually see coming in over here to our office. So I think that's it's good to get some confirmation. And PDF certainly is by far the bulk of it. I guess because that's the easiest one. That's the final form that many people are dealing with. So we're going to talk about all of those, but primarily I think PDF is the one that gets the most is going to get the most attention. Just moving to a quick introduction to ebooks, and so very much a summary. EPUB is the two formats people talk about now: EPUB and MODI. And EPUB is sort of like for everybody else, and it's an emerging standard, and more of the people producing readers are picking up on that. There are variations on EPUB. It's not all the same, and we're going to see some of that as we go along. And Mobi is also a very large player, but it's really only being used by Amazon Kindle. But of course, that is a large player. That certainly is a large player. EPUB is an evolving standard, as I said, which means that things are improving as we go along. We'll see that many things today for complex books are not covered today, are not covered in the EPUB standard, but we expect over the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, which is forever in this industry, we'll be seeing more and more things that are being included. And it's supported by many different readers. And I guess the overall theme over here is that ebooks are publications, and just like people really take note of the publication when they go to paper, you know, your name is on a line when it goes on to an ebook also. And I think that's something that's not quite recognized in much of the industry today by some of the ebooks that you download a lot of times. But I think more and more as people get more professionally involved, we're going to see that producing an ebook really does need the same level of attention and production that real books do. And also, there are no silver bullets. I mean, there are a lot of things we're going to talk about that improve the process and get you to a much better point. But I think you'll see that fully automated conversions are very difficult to do for anything more than the simplest kind of materials. And with that, I'll turn it over to Don to introduce Drori.
Right. Well, thank you, Mark. And as we've mentioned, we're very fortunate to have an accomplished speaker on our webinar today, Ms. Devorah Bloom. Devorah is an expert in ebook conversion at Data Conversion Laboratory, a company specializing in the conversion of paper and electronic materials to ebooks, STML, and XML. She has been with DCL for almost 10 years, managing ebook conversions as well as a variety of our other complex conversion efforts. Prior to DCL, Devorah worked with an earlier generation of ebooks as an ebook coding expert in the Barnes & Noble Digital Content Division. So without any further delay, please welcome Devorah Bloom. Devorah?
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to start with the question, what is EPUB? According to the IDPF, the International Digital Publishing Forum, EPUB is defined by 3 open standard specifications: the Open Publication Structure, or the OPS, the Open Packaging Format, the OPF, and the Open Container Format, the OCF. The OPS contains the actual content of the publication. This is the guts of the publication, the chapters, the sections, etc., all written in XHTML. The OPF describes and lists the content included in the publication. It lists the HTML files, the image files, etc. It also contains the metadata of the publication and lists the reading order of the publication. The OCF describes the directory structure. It declares the MIME type, telling the reading software what this publication is. And what it is actually a zip file. What that means is that if you change the extension of the EPUB to a .zip, you can then open it up using any other file. So having said that, when we talk about using automated tools to convert to EPUB, we have to differentiate what are we converting from. If you already have your content in HTML for web publication, this can be a pretty seamless conversion, since as we mentioned, the actual content is written in XHTML. However, there are a few things that you need to keep in mind. When you're displaying content on the web, you're generally dealing with a large computer screen, and with that, the ability to scroll from side to side. On an e-reading device, however, you don't have that ability. You're dealing with a smaller screen size. This comes into play specifically if your content includes large tables. Another issue is that internet browsers have really good support of many character sets, while the reading devices don't. Parenthetically, I recently encountered an issue with this. The Adobe Reading Systems, which is used by a number of reading devices such as ADE, Adobe Digital Editions, the Sony Reader, and the Barnes & Noble Nook, say that they support the Hebrew character set, and they do. However, as some of you may know, Hebrew is read from right to left as opposed from left to right. So while the reader does support the actual Hebrew characters, it displays it from left to right. So even though it's technically supported, it's not really that useful. One more item to keep in mind is equation handling. If your content includes MathML, which is valid in an XHTML document, The actual reading devices don't support MathML. You'll have to take some additional steps to capture them as images for your EPUB file. Okay, so let's talk about the more complex issue of converting from PDF. What do we have to remember? PDF is a page-oriented format. It describes how things are going to look on a page. That whole concept has no room in an EPUB, since there's no concept of pages in an electronic publication. Multiple column pages will most definitely be a problem when trying to do an automated conversion. There are also other things to keep in mind and think about prior to going ahead with a conversion. A page index, for example. If your book has a page index, you'll need to ask yourself, is this something that I want to retain? So I want to keep the original source page numbers embedded in my electronic file so that I can reference those pages from the index? Or since there's a search function on any reading device, perhaps it's not necessary. Another thing to think about prior to conversion is, do I have objects in my document mid-paragraph? Let's look at the example on the screen. The fact that table 10.1 is in the middle of a paragraph doesn't disturb my reading of this PDF. But is that how I want it in my electronic publication? If I were to simply run this book through an automated conversion, this table would be converted exactly where it is, between the words should and not, mid-paragraph. When creating your e-publication, you'll probably want to set it up differently. Perhaps you want to move it to the end of the paragraph, or maybe move directly after its first call-out. I mentioned some of the items you want to think about prior to conversion. Let's talk about the automated conversion itself. For the purposes of this presentation, I took a publicly available source book and ran Chapter 1 through 3 different automated conversion tools. Examples 1 and 2 are using free software, and example 3 is using a paid software package. So here's my source book. It's PDF normal, meaning that it's PDF with text and all the fonts embedded. It's pretty simple material, just straight text with very minimal formatting. Conversion using the free software in example number 1 shows that we encountered quite a number of issues. The page header of each PDF page with the chapter number was read as text and also as a new chapter. So if you look on the side on the ADE display, you'll see how the automatically created table of contents lists chapter 1 multiple times, one for each page. Emphasis was not retained, paragraph breaks don't necessarily match the source, and garbage text was introduced at the end of each PDF page. Conversion using the free software in example number 2 shows the following issues. Random characters were stripped out of the text. Emphasis was not retained. There was a footnote reference call-out that was just captured as a plain superscripted number. And you can't see it on the slide, but on the next page there was an indented display quote, and its indentation was not retained. Automated conversion using the paid software package showed the following. Extra spaces around punctuation, missing spaces between words, merged paragraphs, unnecessary soft hyphens retained, and again, the PDF page header was repeatedly captured as plain text. So what did we see here? We took simple materials, we tested it with multiple automated converters, and didn't get the desired result. So we see that we can't just run a PDF file through and expect to get perfect results. But what can we do? This is our approach for conversion from PDF to EPUB. We receive the materials and log it into our tracking system. We then go through a zoning process. This is where we go through each page of the PDF and indicate what is what on the page and which parts of the page to include in the text extraction. So for example, we won't include the page header and footer. We then extract the content text to Word. We'll start the image cropping at this time. We then move to the next stage of proofreading and cleanup. Here we go through the text extracted file and clean it up using a list of items that we know may have been extracted incorrectly. Soft hyphens, emphasized text, special characters. The next stage is styling and pre-tagging. Here we go through the content and we add styles and tags to help guide the next step, the conversion. For example, if there is a figure and a caption with no label in the source, we're going to add some pre-tagging to tell the conversion that this caption belongs to this image, and it's not just a plain paragraph following an inline image. We then convert to HTML. We update the style sheets to match the look of the source. We create the EPUB by generating the packaging, the OPF and the OCF pieces of the EPUB file. We validate the EPUB file, view the content, do some final QC, and only then is it ready for delivery. This is what our intermediary Word file looks like. You'll notice that we used HTML entities in the doc file to ensure that a correct conversion happens here. We also indicate emphasized text using pre-tagging. After going through this process, here you can see a screenshot of the EPUB file, and it looks nice, very similar to the print PDF publication, which is the goal here. We mentioned EPUB validation as a step in the process. These are the tools that we use. EPUB check reviews the EPUB to make sure that it follows the IBPF standard, and EPUB pre-flight checks for some other conditions that are more device-specific, since the individual devices implement the standard in different ways. For example, there's no limit to file size under the EPUB specification, but the devices that run the Adobe reading systems, for example, the Sony reader, has a file size limit of 300K for each of the individual files included in the EPUB. So EPUB pre-flight checks for items like that, ensuring that your EPUB will display on the devices. It won't tell you how it will look or if it will look good, but it will ensure that it will actually load up and display. Now, I'd like to go through a few things to keep in mind if your data has special content and how that will be affected in the conversion to EPUB. Let's talk about math. As we mentioned earlier, MathML is not supported on the reading devices. So you may decide to capture your math equations as images. Looking at this example, it looks pretty good. It reads nicely within the text. But what happens when the user changes the font size? The text size gets bigger, but since the equation is an image, it will not change. I just want to note that an exception to this is if you capture your equations as SVG images. They will resize with the user font size change. And the iPad and the Nook currently has SVG support, while the other devices do not. Now, sometimes you have no option but to capture your complex equations as images. But if your equation is linear, like this one, and you can capture it using straight supported Unicode characters, then that will be a better option, since in a case like this, when the user changes the font size, those Unicode characters will also change as well. Large tables. When converting to HTML for web content, tables will ideally be captured as text to enable searching. However, on the smaller screen reading devices, the tables may get cut off, and so you may be better off capturing the table as an image. Again, there are limitations to this. You won't be able to search. There's no resizing, but that's a decision you need to make based on what your content is. Anytime you have content where the layout matters, that's an area where you'll want to take the extra time to update your styles to make sure that the output will look correct. For example, testing materials, questions and answers, if you have numbered passages, the actual physical line numbers are important here, and you don't want the text to reflow to fit, since the line numbers may be referenced in other places. Poetry, this is similar to the numbered passages. What we need to keep in mind here is that not only is the line layout important, but when the user changes the font size, the lines need to stay as is without reflowing and to still look the way you want it to look. Letters, recipes are some more examples of content where the layout matters. Okay, so we've talked about converting to EPUB. Now I'd like to take a little bit of time to talk about an EPUB conversion to Mobi, the Kindle format. And Mark is going to take a couple of minutes to talk about this.
All right, I was just going to, just a couple of notes on the Kindle, because I think the Kindle was designed as a slightly different device and with different intent than some of the other devices that are out there. I think that the iPad and others really have a lot of features that can be very dramatic when used, and the Kindle doesn't have that. On the other hand, the Kindle was really, and this is Jeff Bezos pointed out in an interview that he did, was designed as a reading device, and purely as a reading device. It's intended for people who are going to sit and read for lengthy periods of time. And therefore, it focused on those on the features that are necessary for that. Another thing that was designed into was simplicity. A lot of times we look for a lot of features and a lot of buttons, and Kindle doesn't have any of that. It's really read forward, go backwards, and do some searching. That's really designed for that. So I think in terms of how you look at the Kindle, it's for books that are intended to be read in that way. This is a phenomenal device, and probably better than many others, because on the other hand, it is missing features that others don't have. So when designing books for these, you ought to have to design them in different ways to operate in the different kinds of devices. And I think that's just something to keep in mind. I think that's what Devorah will cover in the next couple of minutes.
Okay, so as was mentioned, the Kindle doesn't read EPUB files. It has its own proprietary format, MOBI. Amazon does, in fact, accept EPUB files, and they state that they're going to do an automated conversion from EPUB to MOBI for you. While theoretically this is true, the Kindle has much more limited support than other EPUB reading devices. So if your EPUB uses anything more than the 10 supported CSS styles, the Kindle will, in a best-case scenario, display the content as is, with no styling, and in a worst case, it will actually omit the unsupported style text. Therefore, creating multiple outputs is highly recommended. In this book, a glossary lists the vocabulary words and their definitions. In converting to EPUB, we added a link to that location in the glossary. Now, the Kindle has a built-in dictionary, and by hovering over a word, you'll see its definition down on the bottom of the screen. So in a case like this, using the same EPUB output and including the linking is unnecessary and cumbersome. Here we have an EPUB file that uses the float CSS style. This tells the rendering software to float this box image to the side of the text of the page. The Kindle doesn't support this valid CSS style, and it will just display it where it's tagged. Borders are another item that's valid EPUB tagging but unsupported by the Kindle. Now, this may be okay for your content. The floating and the borders may just be stylistic, but if not, if it's more meaningful in some way, we recommend creating multiple outputs, one optimized for EPUB reading devices and one for the Kindle. Some publishers actually even choose to have two separate EPUB outputs, one for the Apple devices that optimize the touchscreen technology and another for other reading devices. Now, the previous two examples showed a best-case situation where the Kindle didn't support a style, it didn't support the float, and it didn't support the borders, but it displayed the content as best it can. But this example here, it shows a worst-case situation. Here, in this EPUB file, there's use of white text on a color background. When converting it to MOBI, that text just got lost, and it's just not displayed at all. Now, you could have ensured that your EPUB file only used the 10 supported CSS styles, and then a seamless automated conversion would be possible. But your EPUB file can handle so much more. So again, it would really make more sense to have separate outputs optimized for the different devices. The last thing I want to talk about is the importance of viewing your book on the actual device. Although there are many e-reader simulators to review on a PC, we found that the support does not always match. For example, as we mentioned earlier, border support does not exist on the Kindle device. But looking at this file on the Kindle for PC, we actually see 3/4 of the border. The white text on the colored background that we talked about earlier, the Kindle for PC shows this text, while again, it doesn't appear on the actual device. So what have we learned? Mark?
Okay, I guess that pretty much, I guess, wraps up the presentation. I think just to sum up what I think we learned, there's automated conversions are out there, but they don't necessarily work to the way way you'd like them to. So a lot of times doing some preparatory work beforehand and preparing materials does a much better job of even using the automated tools. But even with that, there's a number of special features and things like special characters and things like that that you really have to watch out for and make sure that they're working. And since different devices today are really rendering things differently, then you really do have to worry about and watch for how they're going to be rendered in different devices. So either sometimes you go to a lowest common denominator and it seems it'll work across the board, or when you're dealing with books that are valuable to you, and then books are valuable, it often pays to really look at how they're rendered in different devices and have slightly different versions that really show off the book in the best possible way. And special content requires special attention, and that's just going to be true now, and it's probably going to be true for a while. And I think the other point is it's your book, and as I heard mentioned, people spend $40,000 on developing a book and making sure the print edition is just right, and then expect the ebook version to be done for $40. Well, that just doesn't work, because there really are a lot of things that you want to watch out for and you want to make sure are right. And the ebook does represent you. And so it's worth spending the extra time and trouble to make sure it's right. And I think that wraps up what I see as the lessons learned, the primary ones. Over to you, Don.
Well, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Devorah. Very insightful information, and it was very good. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's now your turn to ask questions to our speakers. I see a few good questions were asked during the course of the presentation. If you have a question, please use the question box at the bottom right side of your console screen. So there were, like I said, 3 good ones that came in, and we'll start off with those. And we're recording these, and these will be posted on the question and answer. And if you don't hear your question asked, fear not, we will answer it. The first one was, isn't Amazon using the a modified version of Mobi?
Amazon is using Mobi as it is. They do have certain rules, and not everything, again, not everything may be supported, but they're not using a modified version of Mobi. Okay. Mobi is the standard or the type of file that they use.
Okay. Another one was, how much do you see ebooks being adopted for technical documentation?
This is looking ahead. I think everything is going to be available on ebooks over time, and technical documentation is what many people use, especially they need to look up things and reference things on when they're in the field or on different. So for sure, I think that's going to be a major development over the next few years, and indeed we're seeing that. Now, many medical documentation is certainly being done that way, and a lot of it is distributed. Not so much on ebooks, certainly distributed electronically. More and more, we're seeing ebooks, medical books being distributed ebooks. We're seeing technical documentation starting to be done that way, and there are limitations of what's available. And I think the people who are seeing the value added right now are building in those limitations in what they're showing. But over the next few years, I clearly see the trail going in that direction.
Okay, another kind of related question. What are the unique issues, or are there unique issues with delivering training materials in an ebook format?
Well, it depends what's included in that training material. If there's the interactivity that you want to have, then that's great for something like the iPad. But if you have if you want to have a question with multiple answer choices or something like that on the Kindle, then that gets a little bit cumbersome. But if it's just straight text, I mean, it's really all the things that we mentioned. It depends really what it looks like. If your training materials has large tables, then that will be an issue. If it has, if it has anything else that, the layout is important, you'll just have to put more effort into getting it to look right.
Okay. Here's a question. The examples were third-party tools. Have you been able to address these detailed issues and produce a completely 100% conversion from richer to less rich formats?
So let me, I think, rephrase the question. Aside from these three, the tools that we looked at, is it possible to do a more sophisticated conversion using other tools? And in fact, we do use, we built our own tools over here, which are really designed for doing this on a regular production basis. And going through the process that Devorah showed, we're able to get good, rich books. It involves making sure up front that there aren't any problems in the text that's specific features that are needed there, and the output is a good book that supports all these things. But there's no silver bullets here. There are some things that are very unusual that have to be dealt with specifically. Like, for example, one of the examples that Devorah had on one of the screens is an image that shows up in the middle of a paragraph because it's on top of the page and the paragraph sort of flips over. So if you just take it the way it is, that image will end up in the middle of a paragraph. So we have to make decisions, and that's part of the decision process at the beginning of what do you want the conversion to do. You want to take that image and, as a general rule, put it at leave it in the middle of a paragraph, which is probably not what you want to do, or do you move it to the beginning, let's say, of a paragraph? Whenever it finds an image, move it to the beginning of that paragraph, or move it to the end of that paragraph, or do you want to specifically move images to specific places? Now, if you take the book paradigm, the way you build books is that the person designing a book will go through and figure out exactly where each image needs to be. That seems like a bit of a pain when you're doing ebooks, but not really. I mean, it may be that you want to design a particular place, or you design where it's going to go. So each one of those kinds of things, you need to make decisions on how you want to handle it as it goes through the process. But yes, the answer is that if you put a little more thought up in front and a little bit more thought as you're going through things, you can't come up with a very good ebook.
Okay. Here was a question: what devices support SVG, scalable vector graphics?
Currently, the iPad supports it, and the other the iPod Touch also supports it. The Barnes & Noble Nook supports SVG as well. And I think that's it right now.
Okay. One kind of near and dear to my heart: are there concerns if you are converting from data XML content?
So there's always concerns, I guess. I mean, when you're going from XML content, you have a much more you have a lot more information starting off because the information has been tagged. You know exactly where images belong. You know where index things are supposed to be. You know a lot about the document up front, much more precisely than you do with PDF. So you don't have to worry about things like text being lost or being scrambled or any of those other kind of things. But on the other hand, DITA does have some very specific things in there that are not necessarily supported today by ebooks. I mean, they may be over time, but like some of the kind of things you see in DITA are, for example, in DITA is that it's modular text that it's intended to be put together in certain ways. So that has to be done externally from the conversion. You first have to decide how you want the material to be. So I think the way that it would be handled when you have DITA materials and you're using some kind of content management system that's keeping track of all the DITA material is that content management system will figure out and organize all the materials for you and figure out the orders it should be in, and there should be should be able to do an automated conversion from that, and I think that will work very well. So I think there's a very, so one of the things we talk about is your content should be in XML, because that gives you a way to be able to assure you'll be able to produce all kinds of content over time. And I think that's in fact true, but it does take that upfront effort.
Okay. How problematic are multiple column conversions? I guess multiple column presentations.
Yeah. So on your e-publication, and really any conversion that you're going from a multiple column page to a single column output, there are just a couple of things that you need to keep in mind in terms of the reading order. When you're running it through some sort of automated text extraction, you want to make sure that the columns are being read in the right order. And sometimes you'll have images or tables in the middle of those columns, and you have to make sure that they come out on the output side in the correct order and in the right place.
And I want to add that even simple things that sound simple, like the reading order of columns, you look at it and say, well, you read the left one then the right one. That's not necessarily always true, especially when in textbooks or things like that, where you may be going from the top left to the top right, and then to the lower left and lower right, if you can picture that. So it's not always trivial to know which way the reading order will go and how you go around images and all kinds of things that are going to be in that document.
Does it pay to tag PDFs to help the conversion, or is it not worth it?
I think that any tagging that you have in a file, whether it's in the PDF or whether it's XML tagging, it all depends on what tool you're using to do the conversion to EPUB. If you're using the tool that's going to read that tagging, then it will probably be helpful. But many of the tools that are out there, may or may not read that.
Okay. Does the iPad present a special set of challenges?
Well, I don't know if I would say a special set of challenges. I would say that you have an ability to do so much more when you're converting specifically for the iPad. With all the linking back and forth that on the Kindle, you don't want to have to do that. It's very cumbersome to use, a cursor to do linking. But when you have the iPad, a conversion for the iPad, and you're using touchscreen technology, then that's, if anything, it's harder in terms of trying to put together an automated conversion, because the linking won't necessarily all be in there. But it's, you'll definitely come out with a nicer looking and, a nicer looking piece of a nicer looking publication and more usable.
Okay. Here's what it says: PDFs are our bread and butter, and the survey a lot of folks' bread and butter. But we need to develop EPUBs for use in mobile devices. What would expedite the conversion?
Wait a minute. Can you repeat that question? I didn't quite get it.
It says PDFs are our bread and butter, but we need to develop EPUBs for use in mobile devices. What would expedite the conversion of PDFs to mobile devices, to eBooks?
Well, it's very hard to answer that question in the abstract, because it really depends on what's in those PDF files and what kind of information is there. But if I would say, if you're talking in the abstract, if the publications have similar qualities to them, then I think an automated conversion can be tuned to deal with those, with the way those books are set up, and that'll do a better job than just working with just generic software. But I think it all, you have to deal with. I mean, is it double column material, and how do you make? So if it's that, you want to tune for that. Is there a lot of tables? You have to tune for that. And I think it depends on what kind of material it is to be able to give any definitive kind of answer to that, or even an indefinitive answer to that.
Okay, and another question that came in, what are the prevalent EPUB devices that you see? And I guess I would, if we go back to 20 years ago, the VHS and the different movie video playback formats, do you see a consolidation in the industry?
Well, the Kindle and the iPad are definitely at the top of the charts, although the Sony Reader and the Barnes & Noble Nook are not that far behind. But those seem to be, I know that when we work on conversions, those are the devices that we test on to make sure that they look okay on all of those.
So the jury is, I suspect, still out on where exactly things will be a year or two out, but I think it'll take a little while for this to filter out, but we'll see pretty soon, actually. 12 months from now, things change very quickly here.
Any thoughts on EPUB 3, multimedia, video, audio, animations, things of that sort?
Well, we're looking forward to the exact, at the BEA next week is when they're going to be launching the EPUB 3, and we're looking forward to hearing more about it. But, we'll see what happens.
For those of us that don't know what EPUB 3 is, can you help me out?
Well, EPUB, as we mentioned earlier, it's an emerging standard, and right now we're in EPUB 2 or 2.1, and EPUB 3 is going to be launched officially at the BEA. The IDPF is going to be announcing its launch next week, and discussing all the new ins and outs that are going to be affected. Video, including video, is definitely one of the things that is going to be talked about, and I've heard a little bit maybe MathML will be supported, but again, we'll know more after next week.
Okay.
And just one more point about it, even after that's released, now it's going to take some time for the various devices to support the features. Just because it's in there doesn't mean the device is supported, and some devices may never support it. They may choose based on their market that some things are not worth supporting. So all this needs to be looked at carefully.
Do you have any thoughts on if it's better to go to digital first or to go to print first? Or are they two completely different animals?
Okay, so I don't think they're completely different animals. I think, first of all, I think most material is developed electronically today anyway. It's going through some kind of composition process. There has been sort of a push to electronic first, XML first, things like that, which I think are, ultimately, once you've got a good set of material, you should be able to go automatically to print and to ebook and to any other format. But I think that's still, the tools to do all that aren't quite available. So people who are in the process of doing books first can't afford to wait and experiment. They're going to continue doing books the way they've always done them until something really shows up that changes the game. So I think today many of the established publishers are still going to books first and then producing electronic versions after that. But certainly there are a number of established and large publishers that have already switched over and are going to XML first and publishing from there. So I think over the next few years, I think we'll be seeing more and more of going to electronic form, something like XML first. But that's gonna be an evolution, I think, rather than any sharp break.
Okay. Do you use a template for formatting the EPUB?
Yes. There's always going to be some specific, of the source, but we definitely use a template for the, if we're dealing with a regular simple novel, then it's just chapters and we definitely have a template for that. And if we want to make it look, exactly like the hard copy, that's when we have to go into our style sheets and adjust it and tweak it. But we definitely use template.
Okay. One final question. What's the best way to handle content with a lot of math, in your opinion? What is the best practices?
So math needs to be captured right now as images. If you're confident that your users will mostly be using the iPad or the Nook, then SVG is definitely the best way to go because you don't run into problems with resizing. However, if you want to make sure that it's compatible with all devices, then capturing it as an image is really the only way to go at this point.
Okay. Might change. I mean, so so that's also a changing answer. With 3.0, there's rumors that MathML will be supported. If that's true, then that might be useful, but it might take a while before it flows into the field and it is really universally available or mostly available.
Right, like SVG is supported by epub, even right now by epub, but a lot of the devices don't support it. So even though MathML may be incorporated into epub 3, if it's not supported by the devices, then it's not really helpful yet.
Any thoughts on image sizes? Is there one size better than another? Or it just depends on the device, or something else?
72 dpi is the recommended dpi for images. In terms of the size, it depends. If you're talking about a full-page image or an inline image, the size depends on that. If you're dealing with full-size images, then the devices will usually shrink it based on what the screen size is. But again, testing is always good to do.
Right. Well, very good. We are just about out of time. If you were sneaking up on the top of the hour, just wanted to remind you that today's webinar is being recorded, and along with the slide deck and the questions and answers that you've asked, they will be posted and made available. Now, when you exit, we have a couple of final survey questions for you. We'd appreciate if you could take a moment to answer those candidly, and obviously we appreciate your feedback. The next webinar in the DCL e-learning series will be with Scott Abel in late June, on June 29th. The subject will be on publishers and ebooks, so I think a lot of you will be very interested in that. Also, DCL will be at the IDPF Digital Book 2011 and Book Expo America in New York next week. If you're going to be there, please let us know, and maybe we can arrange some time to chat. That's all that we have for today's program. Thank you very much for attending. Have a great day.